Any business can certainly go out and just purchase product, but sometimes purchase orders are a better idea. It's a way to maintain records of goods and services that have been authorized but not yet received by your company. Now, there's a couple of reasons why you would want to do that. One is just to keep track, so you don't have two people ordering the same product because the other person didn't know that the first person had already ordered it. I think you can see that happening. The second also could be for internal processes. If things have to be approved, then this can be part of that process. A purchase order number is given before somebody has the right or the ability to order that product, and the purchase order number is a way of verifying that it went through the right procedures. Any way that you look at it, when the goods are delivered, they are matched to the PO, and that way you can know if there's anything outstanding or if the purchase order is closed. So why do we want to use purchase orders? Isn't it just one more step? Well, if you're a small business, it may be one step that you don't need to do, and that certainly is a choice that you can make. But remember the other things we've been talking about. The only way to know what is ordered and when it's expected is to use a purchase order, other than having little sticky notes all over your monitor to remind you of these things. It also prevents duplicate ordering, like I said, two people thinking that the same things need to be ordered. Think about it at home, when maybe you realize that you're out of milk and your spouse does as well, and by the end of the day you both end up bringing home milk because you didn't communicate that one had already done it or was planning on doing it. It also tracks how much money is committed, even if it's not actually spent yet, and that's really important. When you're doing accrual accounting and you want to know if you can go ahead and maybe make a major purchase, well, it might make the difference if you realize that you have $10,000 in inventory that's about to be delivered that may not otherwise show up on the books. So purchase orders are really a good idea. They're fairly simple to create in Peachtree, and we'll go ahead and go through that process now. A few moments ago, I created an herbal facial scrub that we want to keep in inventory for our spa so we can sell it and make some money. Well, it would be a good idea probably then to have some on our shelves. In order to do so, I need to order it from the vendor, and I'm going to do that using a purchase order. Very simple. Simply go up to the task menu, come down a little past halfway to purchase orders, and then you can begin to fill out the purchase orders window. The first thing it needs to know is which vendor are you going to be purchasing from. Naturally, a purchase order has to be for only one vendor at a time. We only have one, so we're going to go ahead and choose Scrubs Manufacturing. The next step would be to make sure that you have the right remit to and ship to information. Because we only have one address for each, we know that our mail to information for Scrubs Manufacturing would be correct. We haven't filled it in, but it would be. And on the right-hand side, our default information for our spa is also correct. Remember that your business may have a mailing address, a shipping address, a warehouse address, so there could be a variety of things available here. Just make sure that they're correct. On the far right-hand side, you have the current date, as well as the date that this purchase order is good through. By default, this is going to be 30 days. If it doesn't happen in 30 days, there might be some internal procedures that you need to go through. You can manually enter a purchase order number. If you leave it blank, when you print the purchase order, it will be created. Then you see some checkboxes for closing the PO or drop shipping to a different location. A lot of businesses do use drop shipping. For example, if I'm going to drop ship a training video, I might want it to go directly to you as opposed to the company that ordered it. Closing the purchase order is something you will do manually if it never gets closed. Otherwise, it's going to be done when all of the items are received. We can then go down to kind of the center where we have a line of information. You can put in the customer invoice number, a discount amount, what your usual terms are, and what kind of shipping you want. I'm going to say that FedEx next day shipping, which is our default because it's the first one we set up in our defaults, is not correct. I actually want it to just go U.S. mail parcel post. Don't need to pay a lot of extra money to ship the product. It can get here in 4 or 5 business days. We then also have our accounts payable account, which is currently $20,000. If we take a look at that, we'll see that that's going to go to accounts payable. I'll just press escape to collapse that. Now we're ready to get down to business. We now need to go ahead and order each of the items. Of course, you could have multiple items that you purchase from each vendor, and you would simply create each one line at a time. I only have the one item, but I do need to order some, so I'm going to order a quantity of 15, and then I'll press Tab. Notice it skips over the received because that's grayed out at the moment. That's something that we'll use when we actually receive items on the purchase order. Then, of course, we need to select which item. I can go ahead and choose my herbal facial scrub. I happen to have 2 in here, and that's an important thing to take a look at. Sometimes when you're managing inventory, things do get entered a couple of different times. Part of your maintenance should be to always look at your lists, actually every kind of list that you have, at certain times throughout the year, and do kind of an audit, if you will. In this case, I see that I have 2 of them. I'm going to choose the one where we abbreviated the name, and I can go in and modify my inventory later to either delete Herbal Facial Scrub if it's never been used, or to make it inactive so it doesn't show up in the list. This puts in my purchase description, which we entered when we created the item. I can take a look at the GL account it's going to go to, which happens to be 12,000. Resale product, we set that one up as well, so I'll press escape. And the unit price is coming in at $8.13, which I also put in as the last price when I set up the item. If for some reason the vendor had told me that this price has changed, I would go ahead and enter the changed price here. It does the calculation for me. It's a total of $121.95. And if I was ordering product for a particular job and I wanted to bill that to the job or be able to track costs associated with the job, I could enter that in the last column. We can see at the very bottom that we do not currently have any balance owing to this vendor and that our purchase order total is $121.95. That basically is all we need to do. We can go ahead and move to the upper side, and we can choose to save, and then we can choose to close. If you recall, I chose not to print that particular purchase order. At some point, I want to either print it or send it. So how do we do that? Well, in order to do that, we need to go back up and find the purchase order. So let me go back to Tasks and back to Purchase Orders, which is where we started. With all of these boxes we've been working with thus far, there actually are a variety of things that you can do. One of them are to use the little left and right arrows to, instead of create a brand new thing, to just move to the previous or next. The new one is always going to be the last one. So by clicking on the left arrow, it takes me to my previous purchase order, which happens to be my only purchase order at the moment, but this is the one that I just created for Scrubs Manufacturing. Now I want to go ahead and print this, or I can email it, and you'll see that on the toolbar, we have the option to print and to email. Emailing, of course, needs to be set up, and you need to have an email address for the vendor for that to be available. But let's take a look at the drop-down for print. We can select purchase orders to print, or we can just do a print preview. Let's go ahead and say select purchase orders to print. That brings up a dialog box that allows us to do several things. First of all, you can choose to just include all purchase orders through a certain date. You can also choose to number the first purchase order. Remember that by leaving the purchase order number blank when we originally created the purchase order, that tells Peachtree that we want to assign the purchase order number when we process it. Therefore, when we process it in this dialog box, it's going to assign the next sequential purchase order. Since this is the first purchase order we processed, it comes up with 101. We could type any number we want, but the 101 is the default, and that's just fine to keep. If you already have the purchase order number that you entered when you created the purchase order, you don't want to change it here. You also can choose a particular form. You might have something that's pre-printed already, or you might just want to print it all out using your own printer. There are a variety of other options here. You can filter vendors and delivery methods on the bottom side, but basically you need to go ahead and make all of the selections that are appropriate. If you're not seeing the things that you need, or if you have changed some of the settings, you also can click on Refresh List. Now we can see the Scrubs Manufacturing purchase order that we want, and we can see that it is selected on the left-hand side with a little check mark. You might want to go through your print setup and or your email options, depending on the delivery type that you want. I'm not going to worry too much about doing all of this. I'm going to go ahead and just process it. I'll come to the bottom of the dialog. For our purposes, I'm going to click on Print Preview so you can see what it's actually going to look like. And this is what it is. It is a very nice, very professional looking purchase order. And we didn't have to do anything to set that up. This is the template that actually comes with Peachtree. At this point, you could click Close, or I'm going to move to the upper left and click on Print. Choose my printer and press Enter to say OK. Peachtree processes everything that's appropriate, and it said, did the purchase order print and email properly? Is it okay to assign the PO numbers, in other words? So we'll go ahead and say yes, everything was perfect. And that brings us back to the purchase orders window. I'm going to go ahead and close this out. and move to the next step, which would be to actually receive the items on the purchase order. This also is from the Tasks menu. This time we'll choose to work with Purchases and Receive Inventory. The first thing it wants us to do is to select the vendor, so we'll select our only vendor at the moment, Scrubs Manufacturing. We can verify all of the shipping information once again, and we also can see that we could put in an invoice number if we got a bill, or we could say that we're waiting on the bill. I'm going to say that for this particular one, the bill came along with the delivery, so I'll put in the invoice number. By checking waiting on the bill, that tells Peachtree that you need to wait on the bill, and at some point in the future, you need to match up a bill with the received items for this particular purchase order. If we move down into the main part of this receipt, then we can see that we have a drop-down. The first tab is for applying the items to a specific purchase order. We also could click on the tab to make a purchase without a purchase order. Because Peachtree went in and said, I notice that you do have POs, it went ahead and selected this tab by default. If we didn't have any outstanding purchase orders, the other tab would be selected, and this one would not be available. I can click on the drop-down, and if I had a number of outstanding purchase orders, I could choose which ones I wanted to work with. In this case, there's only one, so I'll select it. At that point, it gives us certain information, including the item and the number that we ordered. Notice that these are kind of grayed out, so we can't change these because these are calculations based off of the initial. The only thing we can do is tell how many we received. If we received a partial amount, then the purchase order would stay open. If we put in the entire amount, then the purchase order will be closed. Let's go ahead and say that we did receive the purchase order in full. If I then press Tab, I can move through the other pieces of information, verifying that the price that I thought I was going to pay is the price I was actually charged, and also verifying the total amount. You'll notice at the bottom that we can have other payments and credits that we could apply. We also can say how much we paid at purchase. We have the invoice total on the right, as well as the net due. Well, if I went ahead and paid for this at the time, for example, maybe I went to pick it up and I actually got the invoice and paid at the same time, I would enter that information here. I don't want to pay for it now. I just want to mark that I received all 15 of the items and that they gave me an invoice for it, but I'll pay this when I pay the actual bills. So with that, I can simply save this and close it. We've actually been through the entire portion of working with purchase orders, except for paying the bill, but that comes in the paying bills part. Even before I pay the bills, though, we've been able to accomplish a lot with purchase orders. We have now recorded in our software that we are expecting to receive items, and then we recorded that we actually did receive the items, and we know the amount we owe. We have also been able to provide that information to our vendor, and it's now in the system, so we currently show that we have the 15 items in stock. That's a lot of updating with just a little bit of clicking. Purchase orders are a great way to keep track of what's coming in as well as what has come in and automatically adjust your inventory accordingly.